So, turning to you, Anne, what's your vision for your role as elected prosecutor in Brooklyn, and how has your experiences sort of, focused you in on those particular goals?
Well, what I say on the campaign trail is that people can talk reform, but actually making it happen is a whole different thing, especially when you have 100,000 cases and 1,200 people working for you. So how would I do that? First of all, what Darcel talks about and what the research shows is that the prosecutor is the single greatest agent of power in the criminal justice system. Many people think it's the police, but it's actually the district attorney. Our discretion is enormous, and it's very much not transparent. So the thing I'm committed to is a lot of transparency. And what that means for me is that when I was in the DA's office, I ran a program called DTAP, Drug Treatment Alternative to Prison. Every year I did an annual report about that. That report was the basis of much of the drug law reform in the state, and it continues to serve as a model for change. Well, I think DA's offices have to do that on a global level. Let the public know what they're actually doing. And what I talk about is all of the issues of criminal justice reform that we're speaking about around the nation are things like overuse of incarceration, of disproportionate contact of minorities in the criminal justice system, and things like that. They can be accomplished at 4 separate stages of the DA's office if we do it right in every case, in every courtroom, with every policy. And what I see from the defense point of view, when working for the defense bar, is that people talk about stuff that they're doing, but it's not happening in all the cases. So if you talk about mass incarceration, the mass part of mass incarceration is what happens in every courtroom that the media is not paying attention to. And so for me, as the district attorney, that's where you get into the weeds, you supervise your staff in a way, as Darcel spoke about, accountability, and accountability to the elected official. Because I had a high-level job in the DA's office before, but the buck stops with the district attorney, not with the high-level executives. And so for me, I talk about, obviously, charging is a critical stage of the proceedings. If you overcharge, you set the ball in motion that you're going to be more likely to get bail at arraignments, you're more likely that the case is going to pen longer, they're going to sit in Rikers Island longer. So you can't talk about, here in New York, we talk about closing the jail, closing Rikers Island. You can't do these things and say, I'm in favor of closing Rikers Island. You have to charge honestly what the person has actually done. You have to have constitutional experts in the complaint room to say this is an unconstitutional search. It shouldn't go forward. It shouldn't cross the threshold of a courthouse. Once you do that and charge properly and deflect, there are so many cases that shouldn't be in the criminal justice system. It's the district attorney's obligation to deflect them out of there. And if there's pushback, there's pushback. But eventually, justice will be served. And in New York, we talk about penalizing poverty. You can't just send the case from the criminal system to a civil system that continues to punish poverty and fine a person. That's not a solution for a person who can't afford a meal and steal something, or a person who can't afford to pay the fare. To send them to a place where they have to pay a fine is not a solution for a person who couldn't pay the fare in the subway in the first place. So what happens at charging? What happens at arraignments? The DA's request is the single biggest predictor of what a judge will set at arraignments. And so the DA's request has to be honest, using and promoting alternative forms of bail, which is, community supervision, a community bail fund. Right now, there was legislation passed in New York by the Assembly that said we should raise that level from $2,000 to $5,000. I think the DA should use her bully pulpit to actually advocate for that, so that people who can't afford to pay the bail can come back to court, be assured of coming back to court. And the research already shows that you don't have to have skin in the game in order to come back to court. You have to have a Metro card. You have to have someone reminding you to come back to court. You have to have voluntary use of services that will make you in a better position to come back to court if you need some drug treatment or some other pro-social activities. Also, discovery reform. In Brooklyn, we did do open file discovery, and I testified about that for many years, but it's done sporadically now. It's not done uniformly. The defense bar complains about when it's not done more than it is done. So it's all the exceptions that create the problems in criminal justice, create a lack of confidence in criminal justice. It creates dissension, and it doesn't get justice done. And obviously, with discovery reform, a lawyer can talk to his or her client to say whether or not the case should, result in a disposition at that moment? Should they go from Rikers Island up to an upstate jail, a prison? And so that reduces the population of Rikers Island quicker. Victims get more closure quicker. So there's a lot about discovery reform. And finally, the things that I really teach in law school, which are the alternatives to traditional prosecution. So I think recognizing the power, using it properly in a way that does what we say we're going to do, close Rikers Island, decrease or eliminate disproportionate minority contact. All of those things can only happen if you pay attention to every case, not if you pay attention to the media-driven cases.
Right. So, Brenda, turning to you, in looking at your research and sort of the path that you've been on for the last couple of years, what unique qualities do you think that women bring to the criminal justice system that would help assist in making changes and making criminal justice reform changes? Like, what role do you see women playing as elected prosecutors in the criminal justice system?
Well, I think the way that I see it is consistent kind of with my view on elected office holders across the board, although kind of more so in the case of prosecutors. My own view is that women don't bring any magical innate qualities to any particular role, in the same way that I, as an Asian American, don't bring any magical innate qualities to a particular role. But I do think that all of us, based on our demographics, have unique life experience. And I think being a woman tends to give you a certain set of experiences, for better or for worse, that give you a different perspective on the world. Not in every case, but generally. In the same way that being a member of a minority group tends to have that same effect. So I think my own view is that in elected office, generally, we should strive to have that full range of perspectives represented at the table when decisions are made that affect people's lives. And I think I can't think of a better example than in the role of elected prosecutor, given the kind of discretion that those elected office holders have, as Anne mentioned. I mean, this has been a learning process for me as we did this research on prosecutors, to really understand the range of decisions and the scope of the power that people who hold these roles have. And to have that kind of discretion and power and decision making so concentrated in the hands of one demographic group in our country just seems like not only a tremendous mistake from a kind of policy perspective, but really a ticking time bomb. I don't think, as our country becomes more and more diverse, and these sort of changes in access and equality happen in other parts of our lives, the American people are not going to sign on to a system and have faith in a system that they see themselves excluded from. So even if we don't believe in this kind of equality of representation from a kind of moral standpoint, or as like a good thing that we should strive for, I think it's a big problem for democracy, and in this case, for the faith that people have in the criminal justice system.
So I'm going to pose this next question to both Darcel and Anne, and you guys just jump in as you see fit. Do you think being a woman has helped you in your role? And if so, can you give specific examples?
I thought about that question. Again, I guess because I just think just being Darcel is Darcel. I don't think that there's a difference. It's just being me. I don't know if I was a man, maybe I'd be thinking the same way. I don't really know. But, I think we do. I think that, as a woman, my perspective, and as a woman who's been in criminal justice, I could see a lot more, and I'm also willing to think a little bit more forward than I think that men are sometimes. Sometimes they're pretty regimented. Things are based historically, and, they've had the advantage, so it's not a problem to continue to, business as usual. As women and as a woman, I think very differently from that. I know, I know this has been the way it's been all the time, but it doesn't have to continue to be that way. I mean, taking over in the DA's office, the two things that people kept saying to me over and over, which they're not allowed to say to me anymore, is that, well, that's the way we've always done it. Mm-hmm. Well, we're not. Or, we never did that before. I didn't know you could do that. Well, yeah. You gotta, think outside the box. So I think we're more free thinking in that way. So I think bringing that perspectives help me, and that helps even more when you're talking about charging decisions. You're talking about bringing in new program, new things into the office. Like, let's say, for example, they have these. We started these warrant forgiveness things. I mean, earlier this week, I went into court on a motion and dismissed 160,000 summons warrants that people have for low-level quality of life things in the Bronx. Riding your bike on the sidewalk, open containers of alcohol. Different things like that. Quality of life that is important to us. But these are people who haven't been in trouble over the last 10 years or more, and some of the DAs in the city decided that it was time to do that. Well, my predecessor never wanted to do it. When I was running, I knew that's a great idea, especially having been a judge presiding over those matters. I know how bad those tickets were. And I know that I'm from a county where there was over-policing and there was more stop and frisk in the Bronx than anywhere else that led to a class action lawsuit. So to me, it's a no-brainer that those tickets were a result of those stops and frisks and things like that. You absolutely need to do that to build trust with the community. I set up one right away, but I spoke to my predecessor and said, why? Tell me that. Maybe there was something I didn't know, because you don't know what you don't know, right? So, and he was like, it just seems like a gimmick. I don't see how it's going to make a difference. We don't do that. You don't do that as a prosecutor. Well, that's when I knew that there's obviously, a difference in the way of thinking. So I think that, we can be more thoughtful and think outside the box more. And what your results tells me that 100%. These are the same people that hold the job over and over. That's why things are not changing. You do need diverse thinking in there so that changes can be made.
Yeah.
As Darcel says, it's hard to know if the way I am in the world and the way I think and the way I react is because I'm a woman or I'm just Ann and this is the way it's always been. But I also, I think of experiences. I tried a case in 1989. A police officer killed an unarmed black man on Eastern Parkway, and I tried that case, and I had a trial partner, and there was a screw-up with the NYPD and the forensics. And I said to him, well, we got to do something about that. I read the book, and I never tried a case with forensics before. The guy in the book was a guy that we now know, his name is Henry Lee, was the guy who worked in Connecticut on forensics. I called him up, I said, Dr. Lee, can you re-examine all this forensic evidence in this case? And it was the weekend before trial, and he's like, well, you got to call the governor's office in order to get me to do that. I'm like, okay, called the governor's office. The governor's office said, yeah, if he's willing to do it, you can do it. Drove up to Connecticut, he examined the evidence. It changed the whole tenor of the trial. And my trial partner was a man, and he's like, how did you do that? Now, I had never tried a case like that before. I didn't know you can't do that. I'm like, well, this is the problem. You got to solve it. I don't want to, this cop did kill this person, and I need to prove it. And it's funny because Dr. Lee was the doctor in the OJ case later on. Who knew that the guy I was asking for, and all I knew was that trial, and it was so wonderful. Not only did he do an unbelievable job with the forensics, and I had never put on, an expert in that kind of case, was that he was so good that the defense expert chose not to testify because he was afraid after hearing Dr. Lee. Did I know I was talking to the world-class guy of forensics to be able to ask him to do this? And so Darcel's right, and I don't know if it's I think outside the box, or I'm not restricted by my past experiences because I'm a woman. I will say this, though. When I talk to the women in Congress, they always tell me about the health care reform. And they said it was the women who said we need to make sure our 26-year-olds still have health insurance. And it was the women who said we are prejudiced in health insurance just because we're women. We pay a higher rate because we're at risk of pregnancy. Well, duh, we're the only people who can get pregnant. So the women in Congress did tell me that. And I have to believe that obviously experiences that we bring to the table. And I do say this, that I was a mom raising children in Brooklyn. I know how hard it is. I would never say it's as hard for me living downtown Brooklyn with my children who have two parents who are lawyers, the same as a single mom living in East New York raising a young male in public housing. But at the heart of the issue, having the talk is the talk. What happens, the end of my talk is, oh, I'm sorry, honey, you better not do this with the police, you might get arrested. I know for other mothers, it's, honey, you may not do this because you might get killed. I know the difference, but at the heart of it, it's how a parent thinks about a child going into the world and that child's safety. And I always say this about a DA's decision-making, that what a parent thinks every day is my child safe? But they also think, if my child makes a mistake, will they be forever branded by that mistake? Will they be prevented from going to college? Will they be prevented from getting a job? Will they get kicked out of their school? Will they get suspended? And those are the decisions very analogous to a DA. Are they safe, and is it fair? And every decision that every DA makes always should have those twin pillars equally as important. Safety is not more important than fairness, and fairness is not more important than safety. And so I do analogize that to being a parent or a mother, but I'm sure many other people can figure that out too in DA's offices without being a parent or a mother.
Brenda, any thoughts based on what you saw during your research process, or?
Well, I guess I would say that, I mean, it's really interesting to hear from two women who have worked in DA's offices or are DAs, running for DAs. It really, for me, is validating because it sort of, it supports a lot of the kind of hypotheses that we had during this research and during the outreach that we were doing. And it's really interesting to hear kind of firsthand experience of people in these roles. I think one thing that I was just reflecting on as they both were talking is that another thing to know about elected prosecutors, which may or may not be widely known, is that I was talking about the power of incumbency in elected office earlier and how that is sort of disproportionately true in the case of elected prosecutors. 85% of elected prosecutors run unopposed. So we think of ourselves as having a kind of vigorous democracy in the United States, and over half of all elected offices have no challenger when election time rolls around. So over 50% of incumbents up and down the ballot run unopposed. But with prosecutors, it's again so extreme, 85%. So again, I'm not, it's not my field, it's yours, but I would, it's very exciting to hear from two women who are kind of challenging the status quo, which I think in this particular elected office is just unbelievably entrenched. And I think if we saw the combination of the demographics of the people who hold these positions and the unchallenged the rate of unchallenged incumbency, if we saw those numbers in another country, we would conclude that something was very wrong with their democracy and or their criminal justice system. And I think we have to bring that same level of scrutiny to our own system.
So looking at a more national level, and I'm going to pose this to all three of you, have you noticed with the women elected prosecutors that we have in this country, that they were able to make sweeping policy changes? Do you see any major differences of what they're able to accomplish and the impact that they've had, or no?
Can I just say with something, because when I was at the NDAA, the National DAs Association, so what she's telling me, I experienced on that 108 board member.
Yeah.
They were all white men.
Yeah.
And I was an assistant DA. There's only 10 assistants on that board, and everybody else is the elected DA. And it was an all-boys club every single time I met with them. The women, and I have to commend Darcel, and I'm sure she sees this, the women worked so well together. They just wanted to get the job done. Crime isn't restricted to one county or one state, especially in a technological age. And we really need to work together. And no woman I ever experienced ever puffed up her chest and said, I do a better job than you, I don't want to collaborate with you. Every single woman I've ever worked with in this regard worked well together. And in fact, when I was an assistant DA at a high executive level, we used to have lunch 3 times a year with the women executives all over this city. The women executives at the police department, the other DA's offices, and corporation counsel and other high places, because we needed to get the job done. The electeds didn't do it, but the women assistants did, because we knew we needed each other. I don't think the men feel that they need each other the way the women feel that they need each other.
Interesting.
That's true.
Darcel, thoughts?
Nationally, well, she brings up the National District Attorneys Association. So 18 months, I haven't gone yet. All right,
You've been a little busy, though.
I've been busy,
Just to say.
but I have gone to the National Black Prosecutors Association, and there are more and more elected DAs and state's attorneys happening now. And the women that are in the National Black Prosecutors, I could say all of them are up for re-election, and the stories I hear from them about the challenges that they're facing, and it's because they're women and it's because they're black. And you have the state's attorney in Baltimore, in Florida, Ayala is going, through some challenges there. There's a sister in Portsmouth, Virginia. So just at the Black Prosecutors, we were able to talk, and, we need to lend support for each other. But it was at the same time as the NDAA. And I wanted to go there, and the executive director for the NDAA also came to the Black Prosecutors. And I said, well, next year, I'll have to go. He said, you need to be at both. You need it at both. The assistants and the Black prosecutors need to see you as an elected there, so that you can be an example for them and help them to aspire to want to be you. And at the National District Attorneys Association, is exactly what Ann said. It's like there's very few women, and then very few people of color.
Right.
So even the men are white and they're not of color, and the women, they're very few. And so now I know, again, I'm needed there as well. And that's part of the responsibility. You talk about carrying the mantle, that becomes difficult because you already got your own job you have to do. But now you have to also interact with others to make sure that, we can be of like minds, or make sure that we want to really make a difference, just really get the work done. And I think that's so true with the women. It's like, we don't have time for all of that because we're always doing so many other things. Let's figure out what we need to do here and do it. So, nationally, I think they're being able to move their agenda somewhat, but there's still so many hindrances to them because every time, they try to make a move, it's the gender, they're being pushed away because of their gender, or, you look different, you sound different. A man might have made the same decision and wouldn't have had the same kind of reaction that a woman does. So, it remains to be seen, but we need to be there at the table.
But I want to drill down a little bit more on the challenges that some of the women prosecutors are facing, the elected women prosecutors are facing, because I think it's important that we identify that to either be able to support, or in making that analysis as to whether or not to run, you're going in with eyes open. Mm-hmm. So what are some of the biggest challenges you think are being faced by women prosecutors and prosecutors of color in being able to either A, advance their agenda, or even B, just get in the door? Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I know for me, it was different for me because it was the way that I came in. Mm-hmm. So I was fighting against the process, okay? So that's one of the things, because, the party asked me to step in, I did, and it's like, oh, she's handpicked, she belongs to, the machine or whatever else. So, so she's not really qualified. And like Ann said, what do you mean I'm not qualified? I was assistant DA. I was a judge for 16 years. I've done this work, 32 years. I've been in this field. I taught criminal justice at a local college. You can't say that I'm not qualified, but they weren't looking at my qualifications. They were looking at the fact that you just got in, you don't deserve to be there. And the biggest challenge for me right now, the last 18 months, is trying to prove to people that I was qualified to do it. So now that narrative, every time they wrote something about me, Darcel Clark, blah, blah, yeah, well, she came into office because blah, 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 blah. So that paragraph is slowly going away, but then, it's always going to be the next challenge as to, with all this reform, so many law and order people are saying that, well, you're being too liberal, or, you're jeopardizing public safety. So when you try to think differently, those are the things that you're facing. They're saying that you're not really a prosecutor, that you should be a social worker or a defense attorney. Well, guess what? A 21st century prosecutor is all of those things and more. We have to be, because like you said, we have the power. That discretion we have is tremendous, and sometimes we need to act as the judge or the defense attorney or the prosecutor or the social worker, because it lends itself into the decisions that we have to make. So I think that's some of the things that they're facing.
And Brenda?
Well, you could answer first.
Well, I just think, watching women prosecutors, particularly those who have taken office recently across the country, they really, many of them are sort of self-identified agents of change. And I think this is what it looks like when you challenge entrenched power and entrenched systems that are benefiting the people who are already in the system. And I think for those of us who care about reform and progressive change, and or who care about different types of people with different perspectives holding positions of power, I think we have to recognize when the blowback people are getting is because of either because of who they are or because of the kind of change they're making, and stand by them. I think it's a lonely thing to be out there in front in these positions or in elected office generally. And I do think women and people of color experience backlash even more acutely. So I think those of us who care about the agenda that they're trying to move, not that we need to withhold all criticism, but to recognize that they're caring a lot.
I would say the challenge is that it feels like I have to earn respect in a different way than a man has to earn respect. I think the ABA has a great course in implicit bias, and Harvard University has that test we can take online, and it's not just about race or gender, it's about whether you're prejudiced towards people who are too thin or too heavy. It's all implicit biases, and I've taken that test because I think that women in general are more self-aware. I think they're more reflective, and I think that helps, because I'm going to say this, please let me be the district attorney on January 1st. Right now I'm a candidate, and as a candidate, you have to play to a specific audience, because what people think is where they'll vote, and that's how you get the job. Once you get the job, what people think is in a way less important than you having your own compass. And I think that for me, how I have to play to an audience right now feels a little bit like patronizing and a little bit like it doesn't feel, I'm very authentic, and what you see is what you get with me, really. And I'm very authentic on the campaign trail, but I know that I'm playing to a particular audience, because if they don't come out to vote, this is going to be a very low turnout election based upon all of the political wins here in New York City. And so it's a particular group of people that they need to think a certain way about me in order to get the vote. But then once I'm there, I have to not really care about that. I have to care about what I promised the people I would do and actually do that. And I get the difference, and I think that it's a challenge, but I think that we're uniquely suited to do that as women, because I think we've done it our whole lives.
Well, Ann, I could tell you one thing, that doesn't go away once you become the DA. Because you know what, when you go into and especially being here in New York, we have so many diverse communities. So when I go to the Bronx, I could go in front of one audience or community who they're like, we need more cops around here. They're breaking into my cars and they're doing all kinds of things. And then you go to another community, it's like, we don't want these cops. They're killing my son. So you can't, it's like you're always going to have to do that.
But it's not about, I want to listen to what they say, I want information from them,
Right.
But what they think about me is has to be in my heart. That's what I'm thinking. That of course, and I'm with you. You go out to every community, you speak to every constituency. You want to know, because a lot of times it's communication, it's perception, it's not
Right.
reality.
You're right. You're
They do
absolutely
want the
right.
police there. They
Right.
just don't want the police doing the way they're doing it. They want them serving and protecting. That's what they want them doing. And so, I've had a lot of experience doing that in the DA's office
right.
and at the community defense and now on the campaign trail. But I think about about how I play to an audience is different when you're running for office than you are when you're serving. Look, I'm a public servant. I'm hoping it's that way. I mean, that will keep me in the job in a way that feels right for me, that I can do the public service the way I'm promising people I'll do it, and I will actually deliver on that. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm running, because I think there's a disconnect in Brooklyn to what we think is happening and what's actually happening.
So I'm going to turn back to you, Brenda, and sort of look at next steps. All right, so you've got this amazing, groundbreaking study, with these shocking numbers. Okay, so what now? What happens next?
Yeah.
What do we do?
Well, I think I don't expect these numbers to change anytime soon in any big way. We're releasing new data this fall, which will include a sort of close-up look at the demographics of political power in the 200 largest cities across America, and I think that will be illuminating. And we'll continue to update these demographics over time, but there's not going to be, we're not going to wake up 2 years from now and be like, wow, look, suddenly elected prosecutors are 50% women, and that's great. So I think shining a light on the numbers is really important, but our goal is to stimulate work for change. And I think to do that, we have to tackle the structures and the systems that are producing these numbers across political office. The systems produce numbers, systems produce outcomes that they're built to produce. And so we can't continue to approach the underrepresentation of women and people of color in elected office as an individual problem, as a problem that can be solved by changing individual women and people of color and giving them lots of training and encouragement. All of that is great, but until we tackle things like the organizations that decide who gets on a ballot, like the political parties, the big political donors, and other organizations, we're never going to solve the problem of who holds political office in America. So our hope is to stimulate not only attention on the stark imbalance of these numbers, but a focus on the systemic aspects of this problem and the ways that it can be changed. If the Democratic and Republican parties decided tomorrow that they were going to put candidates on the ballot that with demographics that matched the American people, let's just imagine that scenario. They're like, okay, America is 35% people of color, it's 51% women. From here on out, our candidates are going to match those numbers. Our elected office holders would look like America. So until we start looking at that kind of more systemic level change and pressuring the organizations that make those decisions to produce different outcomes, we'll be stuck in this spot for a while. The good news is this is all very changeable. There's nothing inherent about women or people of color or the political system that means that we need to have this kind of imbalance. So we know how to change it, we just have to decide that it's a priority.
So then now turning to you, Ann and Darcel, what can we as criminal justice practitioners or just as attorneys or interested parties do to be able to attack this statistic?
I think we just have to, as women, continue to mentor young women. I do that all the time, speak at schools, I've taught just going to different community organizations and speaking out. I have programs in my office for young people. I always try to have as much interaction as possible with young women. As far as young lawyers, again, having an open door policy. They knew I was a judge, I'm a DA. That might not be what they want to do, but I want to encourage them to think about public service because that's where we need women most. So, I'm just going to continue to do things like that. But I guess the best way for women to be, to help change this and make women change agents is to just be one yourself. So I'm just going to continue to do the things that I think is right, that's going to be groundbreaking, that's really going to make a difference in the community. And by doing that, I hope that will encourage women to want to be involved. Not only women, but men too. It's like, we can be mentors and role models to all. But to get to where you're talking about, that 35%, 51% really making this work look like people who are represented in the community.
I agree with Darcel. That's why when people have said to me, are you going to still teach law school if you're the elected DA? Absolutely, yes. Because that's part of it. If you are teaching the next generation, then you are teaching them all about things. And now in my repertoire, it's, Professor, I'm thinking of running for office. What do you think? Because I know the people who spoke to me about this never said the things that I will say to people if they ask me that question. If people ask me that question, they're going to get a much different. They're going to get a much different answer from me than they would have than I got from people. So that's paying it forward about what it's like to be a candidate. The other thing is calling people out on the BS. I'm going to say this. I went to the National Organization of Women for a forum. I got unbelievable feedback at that forum. The people who are running it, you hit it out of the park. They called me afterwards for advice about a case. My chief opponent is the incumbent male, the acting incumbent male, said to my husband, oh, she was unbelievable. Let's see who now actually endorses. If now endorses a man after all of that, let's call them out on it. And I think if we call people out on that, that goes a long way. How we do it, I don't know. But I'm thinking out of the box my whole life, and I'll figure that out too. And I think that that's what we need to do, call the systems out on what they're doing that don't support women running for office, that don't support people of color running for office, and don't support elected officials that reflect what this country looks like.
So before we close and open it up to questions, I just want to give each of the panelists a moment to give parting words of wisdom. If you were talking to yourself 10 years ago, or if you were talking to a young woman that's like, you know what, I'm on the fence, I'm thinking about doing this, but I'm scared. What do you tell them?
I tell them follow their passion and do you. So many times we put everybody else first before we put ourselves. And, we have the most to offer, but we offer it to others, rather than doing it for ourselves. So I would say, do what you're passionate about. And if you feel like you want to do something, do it. Help find the support. There's people out there that'll support you, but even if they don't, you have the ability to do it, just do it.
Brenda?
Well, I agree with that, and I would also say that for anybody who wants to run for elected office, but particularly women, to understand sort of what I was saying earlier, it's not about you. At a certain point, it's about you as an individual, but it's not about your individual ambition. It's about the community support and organizational support that you can build. So the first thing to think about is how to do that.
Final word to Ann.
There was research done that said there are 4 initial steps to take to run for office, and someone gave this to me, and I saw that I really only did 2 of them, not 4, and I see that men do all 4, and one of them is discuss running with potential donors. Since I never thought I'd run, I never discussed it, and the things I did in my career were never transactional. And now when I reflect upon them, I think men especially, but people who think they're going to always run for office, are much more transactional in what they've done in their past, thinking I'm going to need that person for that thing. I don't know if it's a woman thing or it's a me thing. I did things because they were the right thing to do. And I'm seeing in a transactional way when I'm running for office now that it wasn't the most transactionally savvy thing to do, but it felt like the right thing at the time. So I think if I had known I was running for office, I might have done one of those 4 things differently.
Okay.
But I'm not sorry.